Hello and welcome back to our studies on the great 19th century philosopher, theologian, Soren Kierkegaard, who lived between the years 1813 and 1855. We're continuing our studies, and this is study number 19, and I'm proud to say it's being published all over the world, and I'm especially grateful for those in future generations who have channeled me lately. Just kidding, no. But no, this is a historical study, in my opinion, to really analyze, what SK's thought is all about for not only philosophy, but theology and Christianity. So that's the purpose of these series of studies, and we're on number 19 already. It's hard to believe that, but we are, and it's based on my book, Soren Kierkegaard, Night of Infinite Resignation by Ross M. Bond. So I'm picking up on chapter 7 now, and I had a little hesitancy in getting into this chapter because it's kind of difficult, and I don't completely, in some ways, understand SK's epistemology, but it goes into and I try to explain SK's epistemology in the words of Johannes Climacus the very best that I can. And there's some areas where, I'm not real sure what SK meant or how he wished to explain it, but this is my best spin, so to speak. And in many ways, in this whole chapter, I give my own understanding of epistemology and how SK tried to explain it, or how it should be explained. Now, once again, we're getting into this whole issue, this age-old issue in philosophy. And if you've studied philosophy, especially Greek philosophy, you know this controversy, this problem that started with Plato, and in his understanding of universals and particulars. So now let's do a brief review here of Plato. For Plato, he had this idea that the empirical or the objective reality that we see in this life has a universal concept already up in heaven by God. And I believe there's a whole lot of truth to that. I really do. For example, a book. Let's take a book. Okay, here's a book. Soren Kierkegaard Journals and Papers. It's a book. You can see pages and all that, covers and all that, binding and all that. Well, now for Plato, this concept of a book is a concept in God's head, in God's mind. And the reality that we're seeing of this book is only a shadow of what an actual, truthful, real book is, according to God. So that's the difference. You have the universal, abstract concept of something like a book, a tree. You could use a tree. You could use a chair. You could use a globe. I have a globe right back here. But now, in any case, when there's a particular, like this book, this globe, that tree outside my office, I'm right here across from a park. Now, what relationship does that have to the abstract concept that Plato produced or explained or hypothesized in eternity? And that's the question between universals and particulars. And it's gone back and forth, idealism and empiricism. So in this whole chapter, chapter 7, what we're really getting into is this issue of universals and particulars. Since there is a duality between subjective thinker, the subjective thinking, and the empirical world, various thinkers in Western philosophy have stressed one over the other. That is either subjectivity, which is ideal, in other words, for idealism, or objectivity, empiricism. While idealism puts the emphasis on the mind of the thinker, empiricism places the emphasis on the objective world. Only when an identity takes place between the subjective thinker and the empirical reality can we have what might be called truth under this definition. At best, however, this identity can only come about momentarily because both the cognitive spirit, the thinker, and the empirical reality to which he wishes to relate are both in process of becoming. To whatever extent it is possible to have this identity, therefore, it is instantaneously revoked by the becoming that is inherent in and between the cognitive thinker and the empirical reality. Hopefully by now you've bought a copy of my book. You can get it on Amazon. And you can follow along because it's going to make it a lot more clear. And we're on page 177. So you have this problem between an objective or a universal concept and then the particular concept, such as the universal concept, the abstract concept of a book, and whether this really is a book or not. And now for a thinker like Aristotle, that really wasn't a big question because he said that his position was that when the cognitive spirit comes into contact in applying an abstract universal concept of book with an empirical reality of a book or a globe, then you have an identity of thought and being in terms of a possibility. Now, tomorrow I may look at the same book and find out that it's not a book. Or I could look at that globe and find out, no, I was wrong. It wasn't a globe. It was something else. But for Aristotle, this was not a big problem. For Greek philosophy, this was not a big problem. And for medieval philosophy, this was not a big problem. They assumed the identity of thought and being when thought came into contact with an empirical reality that it could identify and say, yeah, that's a book, that's a globe, that's a lamp, whatever. Now, Johannes Climacus, he's a pseudonym that wrote what we're studying right now, the postscript. He points out the problem is confounded because since the identity of thought and empirical being can only happen when the being in question has thought content in itself, then you can only have an identity of thought and being with an empirical reality that has being or has thought content in itself. You can't have an identity of thought and being when the being does not have thought content. So now this is an issue. I wish SK, in the words of Johannes Climacus, had really gone into a lot further. Because if that's true, then the only identity of thought and being I can have is with a being that has some thought content in itself. So that would mean, okay, a human being, number one. Any sentient existence, like a human being, number one. Then animals have some thought content, however much, depends on the animal. They have a will to survive. They know how to build a nest. A bird knows how to build a nest. So a nest, and so these sentient beings do have some thought content, but can we limit it to just empirical reality that has some thought content? Now, this is my own spin, so to speak, to make it clear to myself what SK was really talking about in the words of Johannes Climacus. To me, all empirical reality has some thought content. You have to have some thought content in order to exist. Nothing can exist without some thought content behind itself. And this is just, you can observe it yourself. If you want to build a house, for example, you have to conceptualize the house, you have to build a plan for the house, and then you have to execute it. So, in my opinion, I wish SK had made this a little more clear than it is, but all reality has thought content in itself or behind itself, so to speak. For example, a stone. A stone, as far as we know, is not a sentient being and has no thought content in itself. But it does have thought content behind itself, so to speak, in God's idea of what a stone is. Now here's a real interesting issue here. What are these abstracts? What are these universals from God? And really, we don't know. I mean, I believe they exist. I believe that God has universal concepts, abstract concepts of what a cat is. And I think, a philosopher I read recently, either Heidegger or Karl Jaspers, said, well, what is cattiness? Or, well, this is it. What does it mean to be an individual cat? Well, actually, only God knows that. And so how can we ourselves, in our thinking, develop abstract universals? Well, the only way really for us to do it as human beings is to develop a definition. And whoever agrees with that definition is now in that universal agreement of what a cat is, what a book is. That's it. That's how we develop universal concepts or abstract concepts of what things are. So that's the only way. You have a universe of people, human beings, who agree on a definition to something, and that creates a universal. For God, there is another universal, which only God knows, and we can only surmise it and create a model for what the universal, the abstract concept is in God's mind. And that's the only way we can do it. That creates a universal, a definition. Whoever agrees with that is in this universe. Whoever disagrees with that is in a different universe of thinking. And that's a basic understanding of logic. And then when you get into the particulars, is this a book? Is that a globe? Is that those up there on my shelf, are they books? Well, that depends on if you're in that universal definition, then yes, they are, or no, they're not. So that's the only way we can resolve that issue of universals and particulars. So I won't go on any further in my wish that SK had, in the words of Johannes Climacus, had really explained these things a lot better. But he skipped. He did not go into depth on that, as I have explained before, because he saw a different problem. And that is that existence and the cognitive spirit are both in process of becoming. So if I see the globe back there on my table, or see my book here, I may see it as a book right now, but I might look at it again tomorrow and realize that it's not a book. It could be a false book. That could be a false globe. So that's a real problem in empirical reality. Okay. So let's get down to practical application of this epistemology. In science, for example, the theory of relativity can only become a theory. It can't become a fact, because no matter what the empirical reality that I agree in a universal to agree with, tomorrow I may find out that there's a new thought, there's new thinking, a new abstract, a new universal that disagrees with it. What is a cat? Well, today we decide what a cat is, and tomorrow we find some evidence in some far-off place that a cat is not always what we have always assumed as a cat. So the theory of relativity is always in process of becoming. Tomorrow it may turn out to be totally false. So this is the problem with empirical thinking. Now, I've used this analogy of a book many times, and a book is kind of a universal idea. Everybody knows what a book is, pretty much, as an abstract thought. But let's say that I see a book up on my bookshelf right across here, right across in my office, and I conclude that is a book. Now, that is a perfectly logical explanation of a book, and a perfectly definition of what a book is. But let's say tomorrow I'm dusting off that bookshelf, and I touch the book, and I come to realize that it's not a book, but it's a ceramic imitation of a book. Well, my logic did not, and my sense perception did not deceive me. It was my wish to believe or not to believe. If I had kept my belief in suspense and decided not to believe, then I would not be in error. It's only when I choose to believe or not to believe that I get into an error as to what an empirical reality is. So that was the essence of Greek skepticism, is not to believe or not to believe, because they realize, truth really comes down to whether you're going to believe it or you're not going to believe it. Now, when Kant came along, he pointed out, and there is a great deal of legitimacy to Kant's statement of the thing in itself which cannot be thought. But that's modern idealistic skepticism, as opposed to the Greek and medieval skepticism for the most part. Does that book contain empirical reality? No, it doesn't. But that wasn't a problem for Greek thinkers, and that's why S.K. broke with it and said, yeah, you're right. I can't have an identity with that book in thought. I can only have an identity of that book right here on my table by abstracting it and applying an abstract or a universal concept of what a book is. So it goes into the world of the abstract and of thinking. So, but that's the difference between Greek skepticism and modern idealistic skepticism. Okay, so we're going pretty well here. We got about let's see, 10 minutes here. 10 minutes. Okay. So the simple principle of skepticism can be applied to all sciences. In history, for example, the attempt in the historical sciences to create a system to explain history can therefore only be achieved by creating a model of history, which can only have validity hypothetically. It can never get beyond that in history or any of the empirical sciences, for that matter. Therefore, for the subjective thinker, having seen that the road of empirical knowledge can lead at best only to theories and speculation, two ways present themselves. the way of objective thought and the way of subjective thought. So you have a road, one road or another road to go down. Do I try to understand truth in the objective way, or do I try to understand truth in the subjective way? And here we're talking about ultimate truths. The way of the objective reflection makes the subjective accidental and therefore transforms existence into something indifferent, something vanishing, away from the subject. The objective way of reflection leads to the objective truth, and while the subject and his subjectivity become indifferent, the truth also becomes indifferent. And this indifference is precisely its objective validity. For all interest, like all decisiveness, is rooted in subjectivity. It is only subjective knowledge that has an essential relationship to existence. All other knowledge is accidental and indifferent. Hegel's idea of mediation, pure being, the I am I, the basis of a lot of speculative philosophy in the 19th century, is a pure mirage, a mathematical point outside of existence. And when we get into concept of dread, we're going to go into a lot more of Hegel's epistemology and what he meant by mediation and reconciliation. So we'll wait for that. The objective thinker, for the objective thinking person, the question is raised in an objective manner. The attention is directed objectively to something objective to which the knower is or can be related to that. When the knower relates himself to such a thing correctly, then he can be assumed to be in possession of the truth. With respect to God's existence, the objective thinker directs his attention to an objective object, assuming that he comes into the current relationship with this object, and therefore he is relating himself to God. It's an attempt to find God out there in the universe somewhere with a telescope or whatever you have, and that's the objective way of trying to find God. The subjective thinker, on the other hand, looks inwardly for God in the passion of his inwardness. There are therefore two ways. One leads toward the objective, and one leads in the passion of inwardness to subjectivity. And this is once again a whole analysis of SK's idea of the subjective thinker in the postscript. The subjective thinker relates to God in his inwardness. SK uses Socrates as a prime example. Let us consider Socrates. Nowadays, everyone dabbles in a few proofs of God's existence. Some have several such proofs, others fewer. But Socrates, he puts the question objectively in a problematic manner. If there is an immortality, he must therefore be accounted as a doubter in comparison with one of our modern thinkers with the three proofs of God's existence in the objective world or in logic. For Socrates began his proof in a different way, and he said, if there is a God, then he would risk his entire life to prove it and meet death as he did. So this is the example of a passionate inward thinker, a thinker like Luther, who risked everything on this belief that there is a God, and continually found the path of Christianity as a way and not a result. Not a result objectively, and not proved by logic or any other objective thinking, but rather through the passion of inwardness. And once again, we get back to Christ's words, the kingdom of heaven lies within, and the Christian teaching that Truth is always a way, not a result. When the passion of inwardness in the relationship to the eternal happiness and a relationship to an eternal God becomes truth for the individual, the relationship is a way and not a result. Moreover, in this world we live in, it remains an infinite way. That is, it always remains a puzzle or a paradox, especially in religiousness B, the specifically Christian God relationship. The conclusion of this analysis is Kierkegaard's definition of truth. An objective uncertainty held fast in an appropriation process of the most passionate inwardness is the truth, the highest truth attainable for an existing individual. And that's SK's definition of truth, in the words of Johannes Climacus. I'm trying to see the time. Okay, we've got 4 minutes to go. Okay, all right. The eternal truth that is God is not paradoxical in itself, but becomes so in relationship to a single existing individual. While the single existing individual exists, i.e. is someone in the predicament of becoming, the eternal is infinitely greater than the individual and is finished in the sense that it has been, is, and always will be. That is God. God always has been, always will be, because he's eternal. But when the existing individual comes into contact with it, it becomes a way and a paradox. For the striving understanding. In religiousness A, the objective concept of God is ubiquit nesquam, and in religiousness B, the God becomes an ever greater objective paradox by becoming a man, in Luther's words, for example. Our faith is an odd thing, that I should believe that man who was hanged is the Son of God, although I have never seen him, known him, or met him. He is to me like a stone placed in the middle of the sea, a stone about which I know nothing except that what the gospel says, I am the Lord. Well then, if he says so, so be it. Now, so here we have this objective uncertainty of our attempt to and our understanding of what God is in Scripture. And I'm going to try to explain a lot better what it was in the pagan religions in religiousness A. So I didn't explain it very well right there. But we'll get into that when we get into the religious sphere of existence and what the difference is between the objective uncertainty was or is still in pagan religions and what the objective uncertainty is in the Christian religion. But they're both similar in that they're striving subjectively to deal with the objective uncertainty of God. The highest truth, the highest reality we can know in this lifetime. In the next lifetime, it will be perfect for all Christians. But in this lifetime, it's always a way. It's always, we're learning, and in an existential life where we not only learn it, but we practice it. Okay, so that we'll go into when we get into the religious sphere. Okay, so we have 1.5 minutes. My producer says I can't go over 30 minutes, so okay, I think this is a good time to break off right here, and I want to give a preview of the other things we'll get into when we get through this. This is really these last three chapters, 5, 6, and 7, I mean, they're really my favorite all-time part of SK's writings in the aesthetic and philosophical sphere. Okay, bye.